The concept of function is a crucial part of any modern day programming language. The idea of function is to group a set of statements which happen to be occurring multiple times in a code. Now, suppose that you are writing some sort of code which needs to calculate the minimum of two numbers repeatedly at different parts of the code. Now, the better approach will be to put those entire thing of comparing two numbers within a function and just call that function to get the minimum of two numbers. So instead of writing the same if-else statement for comparing the two numbers in multiple parts of the code, to reduce the redundancy, we take the help of pointers, which is actually the collection of the same if-else statement which serves our purpose by returning only the maximum or minimum number by comparing them. So instead of writing the if-else statement everywhere in the code, we just write a single if-else statement for comparing the two numbers, and we just call the function which serves our purpose. So hello everyone, welcome back. In this video we are going to learn about functions in C++. So without directly going to the coding parts or the coding perspective of the function, it's important that we understand how the functions actually constitute and what actually makes a function, or how does a function actually look like in C++. So let's go to our screen and I'm going to explain you how the declaration of function looks like. So if we go down, let's give a quick heading about functions in C++. Functions in C++. So today So our heading is done about functions in C++. We are going to see how can we define a function actually. Now function declaration happens in one way. So let's do a snippet over here. So every function has a particular return type which is to be mentioned first. Return type. Okay. This return type is actually the data type or the result data type which the function is actually evaluating or returning to the user. Now this can be an integer, this can be a double, this can be a float. It's depend upon the kind of operation a particular function is intended to do. Now after writing the return type of the particular function, we have to write a function name or give a name to our function. Now once we are giving a name to our function, there comes two parentheses. Now inside this parenthesis, we supply parameters. Now what are actually parameters? We will come to this in a very short time. Now after this parenthesis, there is the piece of code which gets executed every time we write a function or we call a function. So here comes the logic of the, or you can say logic of the function. Now this can be anything. This can be about finding the minimum of two number, finding the maximum of two number, anything just to serve the need of the function. So every function will have a return type, a function name, some sort of parameters over here. So I'm commenting this is not writing correctly. Okay, this is not the correct way to write parameters, but still for the sake of understanding I'm writing. So every function will have a return type, a function name, some parameters, followed by the logic of the function or the function body, and at last we'll have a return value. Okay, because after executing the code, the function has to return some output, otherwise there is no use of the function, right? So every function will have a return type, a function name, some parameters, the function body, and the return statement. Now we come to the part of parameters. Now what are actually the parameters? Parameters are the set of values with which the function performs some sort of operation. Now these parameters may or may not be present. Yes, we will come across situations where the parameters are not always compulsory, but yes, most of the time you will find some parameters are present in the function. Now these parameters are the input to a particular function with the help of which the function actually executes the logic. So here let us now define some real function. So this was, you can say this was a definition, or you can say just a bare minimum structure of a function, or how does a function look like, a skeleton of a function. Now let us actually write a function. Okay, so let's change to text and let us actually now write a function. Now suppose we want to write a function which plays a role by finding the maximum of two numbers. We have studied already if else, right? So we are going to write a function which will return us the maximum of two numbers which are supplied to them, and suppose those two numbers are of integer data type. So since my function is going to return a maximum number, so it is already or always going to be of integer type, because since you are supplying integer as parameter or input to the function, so obviously my function will return an integer value. So let's write int over here. So int specifies the type of the result or the data type of the value the function is going to give me as output. So since my function is going to give me an integer as output, so I have mentioned int. Followed by this, I have to give a function name. So let the name of the function be max of 2. Okay, since we are finding the maximum of two numbers, so my function name is max of 2. Followed by this comes the parameters, then the function body and some return statement. Now inside the parameters, we are accepting two values from the user to compare. Suppose those two values be of integer type, let it be int a, int b. Now my purpose is to compare the values of this a and b and to return the value which is the greatest. So simply we will write a if block. Okay, so we can write that if a is greater than b, do something else. That means if b is greater than a, do something. Okay. Now since we are returning the maximum value, it's necessary that we can store the max value in some other variable. So let us declare that variable int max. Now if a is greater than b, obviously my max number will be equal to a, and if it is not, if that means b is greater than a, then my max value will be b. Now once we are finished calculating the maximum value, it's important that we return the maximum value to the user or the part of the code which calls the function, right? So which part is actually having the answer? This max value is returning the maximum value. So we have to return this maximum value to the function which actually calls this max of two functions. Okay, now how do you send value to this max of two function? It's pretty easy. Suppose from the main method, okay, so this is our int main, and from this main method we are going to call this function. So suppose I want to compare two values, say 5 and 6. So int a equal to 5, int b equal to 6. Okay, now I want to call this max of two function and I want to find out which is greater, 5 or 6. So how can we do it? We can simply call this max of 2. Then we can to supply the input. We have to supply the input to this max of 2 function which we have just written. That is, in place of a and b, we have to supply some values. So what are the values? These are actually the a and b in our main function. Okay. Now we can see that this max of 2 function is returning some sort of value as result. So we have to store that in somewhere, right? So for storing it, we can write int answer equal to max of 2, which is actually returning me the maximum of between two numbers a and b. Now once we are done with finding out the maximum number between the a and b, we can simply print the result. So in this way we can call a function, we can send value to them, and we can get the required output. Now one important point, just for the sake of theory understanding, this part is actually the value which the function call statement where you're supplying the value to a particular function, this parameter is actually called the actual parameter. Okay, and this part in the function declaration line where you are accepting the two values as parameter, this thing is called the formal parameter. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so that in the definition of the function, the line which is present over there is called the formal parameter. I'm sorry for the typo. Meter, just a minute. Right. So in the function definition line, the parameters which we are receiving is called the formal parameter, and in the function declaration line, the function calling line, the values that we are passing or the parameters that we are passing is called the actual parameter. So that's it about functions. Now there are different ways of passing values to a function, but before going or understanding that, let us execute this code and find out the maximum of two numbers in our code editor. So this was just a rough understanding of how functions actually work. So let's go to our code part and let's see how functions are actually called and used in our code in day-to-day life. So let's go to our code editor. We are here in our code editor. This was some work which we have done previously. We will remove everything and keep the bare minimum things. So once that is done, let's see what we can do over here. So here we are in our code editor, and let us understand how can we do or compare the two numbers a and b using a function call. So for defining a function, it's important that we come outside the main function, because function within function is not allowed, because main is also actually a function, right? Your int main that you write is actually a function. The int main also have a return type, a return value which is telling whether the function is executed correctly or not, and the name, obviously it is the main function. While teaching you functions, I've also mentioned that it is not always necessary that your function will have some sort of formal parameter. So as you can see, the main function does not have a parameter. So that's it. Let's come to our function which will find the minimum of two numbers, or say maximum of two numbers. Let us learn about how the function can return the maximum of two numbers. So for that, let's define the function. So it will be int max of 2, int a, comma int b. So this is actually the formal parameter. Let me turn off my AI. Okay. So my function name is max of 2. It takes two integer a and b, which is the formal parameter. Now I have to return the maximum of 2. So let me store the max value in some random variable, say max. Now our work is to compare the two values a and b. So if a is greater than b, we will do something else. That means if b is greater than a, we will do something. So if a is greater than b, max is equal to a, and if b is greater than a, then max equal to b, and at last we have to return the result, that is max. So we have to return the result, which is max. Done. Our function is done. This is the function which will return the maximum of two numbers. Let's execute this and find out how this will actually work. So let us do it dynamically. Let us take input of values from the user and we will compare it. So we have to accept two values, say x comma y, and let us do a prompt, enter two values. So the user will be prompted to enter the two values. If necessary, put an endl, int c in x, c in y. Now once this is done, we have our two values and we will compare this now. So for comparing this, we will store the result, int result. Okay, and we will call the function max of 2 and we will send the values x and y. Okay, now once that is done, we will do the cout. Okay, the greater number is, and we'll just print the output, that is result. Yes, our function is done. So what is happening actually in this program? We are declaring two values x and y. We are accepting the values of x and y from the user. we are comparing the value of x and y by using the max of 2 function, and we are printing it by using the cout. So max of 2 is actually comparing the two values. So what happens here is this max of 2 is sending the value of x and y, which we take as input from the user, to this a and b. So the x value is copied to a and the y value is copied to b, and once this is compared, the result is returned. Okay, so let's run this code and let's see how this function is actually working. So let's go to the runner. Yeah, so it is now compiling. So it says that b is not a type name. I got some sort of error. Okay, so I selected the entire thing, my bad. So yeah, it should work now. Just a minute, I will select it. Yeah, so it is compiling now. It is asking us enter two values. Let the two values be a, that is 10, and y be 30. So we obviously know that 30 is the greater value, so it is printing that greater number is 30. So that means our function is working perfectly. So you can change the values and say, now I give the values as 100 and say 600, 500 and 100. So see, we are getting that 500 is the greater number. So that's how a function is actually working. Now one thing we have to understand, that when we are calling a function in this line, there are various ways of calling it. This way, the approach which is implemented over here, it is called the call by value approach. Okay, this is the call by value approach. Now what happens in this approach is the value of x and y, which we take as input, is copied to a and b in this function. Okay, now any changes to this value of a and b in this part of the function will not be reflected to the values of x and y. Why? Because the value is copied, not the variable itself is copied, right? Now if I want that, I will call a function and that function will modify the value of x and y. That can also be achieved, but that is done using the call by reference. Let us see how the call by reference is implemented. So let us just assume our case or the need of a function which will add say 10 to my input value and I will return it. So, or let us say that it will swap two values. Okay, suppose I have x equal to 10 and y equal to 20. So after calling that function, my x value should become 20 and my y value should become 10. So this is actually the swap function which we need in data structure like things and many other programming perspective. We need this swap function. So let us call the swap function which will swap the values of x and y. Okay, that means interchange the value of x and y. So since it is going to return the integer type only, so let's write int swap to numbers, swap to numbers, and it will accept two values, which is int x, int y. Here there is something which I have made purposely wrong. Okay, and this is the return value. Now since we are accepting the accepting the real value, that means the reference of this x and y, so we have to just put a star over here and also a star over here. Now once you put a star over here, it actually means that you are accepting some sort of reference from the function which is calling this function. So once this is done, any changes to this x and y in this swap to number function will actually be represented or reflected in the main function when you call it. So let us just write the swap function int temp equal to star of x. Okay, star of x equal to star of y and star of y equal to temp. Now what is this thing? We will just see in a bit moment. Okay, so what is happening here is, okay, let's remove these two things. Okay, let us first call this swap two numbers function. So swap two numbers, and here this is the function, and I will swap the values of x and y. So since we are sending a reference of x and y to the swap to number function, we will use this symbol, which is ampersand x and ampersand y. So what is happening is the reference of x and y is being sent into the swap to number function, so that any changes reflected in the swap to number function will be obviously notified or reflect in this main method. So after entering the values of x and y, so if you write before swap, so before swap I want to print the values of x and y. Before swap, x is x and y is this. So we'll now see how this same function is altering the value of x and y, and I will change this to after swap. So what is happening here is we are taking two values as input from the user, we will swap them. So before swapping, I'm printing that the value of x is x and the value of y is y, and I'm calling this function swap of two numbers. And after the swapping, I am printing the values, as simple as that. Now what is happening in this star and what is happening here in the star of y equal to 10, we will come to this in just a minute. But before that, I would like to explain you that, is our function actually returning anything? No, the function is not actually returning anything. The function is just swapping the value whose reference is taken by this star of x and star of y. So it is not always compulsory that our function returns a value. So in that case, you can just remove the return statements. Okay, and once you press the run, so it will ask us for the value of x and y. So let us give the value of x and y to be 10 and 20. So it is saying that before swapping, the value of x is 10 and y is 20, and after swapping, the value of x is 20 and y is 10. So let's make it a bit easy to understand by putting an endl over here, so that it is much more readable. Okay, so let's run this again. Let us now give the value as to be 40 and 50. So it is saying that before swapping, x is 40, y is 50, and after swapping, x is 50, y is 40. So we can see that our values are absolutely interchanged with the help of this swap to number function. Now let us understand what is the meaning of this star of x and star of y. So this star of x and star of y is actually a pointers, and here we are sending the address of that particular variable and we are storing it in pointers. Now what are pointers, how we are sending the address of a particular variables, or what is actually an address, we will see that in a video of pointers in C++, which is the next video of this series. So I hope you have enjoyed dealing with functions. So I would advise you to practice some more questions on function and have fun with them. So that's all in this video. I will see you in the next video where we will learn about pointers in C++. It is a very interesting concept and I hope you will like it. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.